Welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Shaun and Jim.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. I'm Jim Galante. He's Sean Gold. That's why we named it Shauns Take. How we doing this week, Sean?
Doing good, Jim. Excited for our first official episode. I think we got not just this week, but many weeks to come. A lot of very exciting topics to throw out there for our listeners. So I hope we provide all you listeners a source of entertainment every single week moving forward.
Entertainment and maybe, just maybe a little bit of information also.
Just a little bit.
Not much, but just a tad. And what we're going to do for those, I'm sure a lot of us, a lot of the listeners who've seen us together know that we've always talked about college football. We've talked about, the betting and making picks. And also those who are followers of the Keystone Sports Network know we're big Penn Staters. We also like to follow college football. What's nice about this show, Sean, is you and I are big overall sports fans. So we get to cover anything and everything.
That's right. And it's refreshing because while I love college football, there's so much that goes on in the world of sports, and we're going to get to cover it all. And we're going to have a lot of very interesting and exciting conversations about, other sports and just other elements of even college football that we didn't necessarily get to cover when we're making our picks in season.
Exactly. And let's start with this one, Sean. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. And this is a fun topic. Travis Hunter, who know that you're a Colorado Buffalo guy. Okay. So Travis Hunter, the two-way player, won a Heisman, plays wide receiver, plays defensive back, cornerback, very good, both sides of the ball. But it led to the question, I think it was perhaps at the combine, he was asked to compare with baseball, where you have Shohei Ohtani, who's probably the best baseball player on the planet. And he's a two-way. He's both a pitcher and a hitter. He's capable of playing the outfield, but the Dodgers just have him DHing. So what's tougher, Sean? Two-way player in football, two-way player in baseball.
When this all came out and Travis Hunter said that, immediately with my football background, I jumped right onto football to try to, defend some pride and say football is definitely the hardest to go both ways. And then as I started thinking about it, almost, at least growing up, every receiver, I was a receiver myself in college, could play defensive back as well. And I'm not here to say that I could play defensive back or receiver nearly as well as Travis Hunter does, both of them, let alone one position. But it's more natural to be able to play receiver and then play corner or safety as well on the other side of the ball. Most times in high school, you're going both ways. And then when you get to college, you kind of settle in to one position, unless you're Travis Hunter, which we're seeing has been a unicorn in the sport. I think that's easier in terms of skill to translate receiver to defensive back than it is pitcher and hitter. Typically, once you almost get to high school, you see a lot of pitchers stop hitting. And for Ohtani to be doing what he's doing, not just doing it, but being an MVP in it and a Cy Young candidate on the mound at the same time, I think that skill-wise is by far the most miraculous thing that we've seen in a long time in sports. So I would give the upper hand in terms of skill to Ohtani, but I will say the impact Travis Hunter puts on his body, I think, is greater. And I know pitchers do go through a lot. You got to maintain that elbow. And we saw Ohtani have problems with that already in his career. I would say it's more on Travis Hunter's body, but the skill is in favor of Ohtani. What do you think, Jim?
I think he stole a lot of my thunder there, Sean. I was sure you were going to say football, okay? And if you want to use the word tougher, that's football, because it's such a much more physical sport and the toll it takes. But baseball is more a skill game. I think football is a physical attribute game. And a lot of these guys who are so talented, I remember talking to folks who saw Micah Parsons play football in high school and talked about what a great running back he was, and that he would go to football camps and play like every position. He'd be a running back, he'd be a linebacker, he'd be a cornerback, and able to do it because a lot of the skill sets are comparable. Wide receiver and DB, I think, are very comparable. You need to have the physical speed. You need to have that hip turn ability. You need to be able to track the ball. The difference is the defensive back, well, you're okay knocking the ball down where a wide receiver has to catch it, but very comparable skill sets where pitching and hitting, each very much a skill that are very different and distinct skills. So I'm going to say I'm going to agree with you. I think it's the baseball side.
Yeah, and it's funny, I always see on Twitter, and this was even before this debate came up, that the hardest thing in sports is hitting 100-mile-per-hour baseball that is curving, is zigzagging, is getting at you in the blink of an eye, and that's one of the hardest things to do. So when you look at Ohtani, he not only does that better than anybody else, but he also throws those 100-mile-per-hour fastballs. So I think the skill there is just immense. And Travis Hunter, what he's doing is no small feat, but I do have to give the upper hand to Ohtani on this one. Now let's stick in college football. Let's talk about the ACC. They have a new plan to reward better teams with their rev share. So, Jim, what do you think about this recent ruling by the ACC on all this?
I think it's really fascinating. Just to give a little background on what's happening and why it's happening, Florida State and Clemson have been in court against the ACC for years now, looking for ways to get out without having to pay the previous agreed amount money that it would take. And what they've done is both Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC, they need each other because Florida State and Clemson found out the Big Ten and the SEC aren't that set on bringing those two teams in. So the groups are kind of stuck with each other, but they had to find a way to make it work. And for years and years, it was set up where the bottom team in a conference gets the same amount of money as the top teams in the conference, no matter what. Northwestern gets what Ohio State gets. Vanderbilt gets what Georgia gets. And this is the first time it's come to a head. So the way they're working it, and it was fascinating to me, instead of saying, you know what, if you finish in first place or second place, you get more money, or you go to the tournament, the playoffs, instead they're doing it, they're going to the source of the income, which is TV revenue. So if you are Florida State, Clemson, Miami, you're the one who brings in the TV ratings. So they're actually going to use a plan where they're going over the previous 5 seasons and they're working it out based on how your TV ratings were, how many eyeballs you brought, which is directly how much money you are now bringing into the conference. And those teams that do well on television will be the ones making more money. I'm good with it, Shaun. It's a capitalistic world. You're investing in your football program. You're the one who gets the eyeballs on the TV sets. You deserve more money.
I have to agree with that. I like the rev share, based off of the percentage of revenue that you're bringing in for your conference. And I think the thing that what gets challenging is, how do you not create a top heavy conference with this? Are we going to continue to see Florida State and Clemson? Not that Florida State had the year that people thought they would last year, but historically, Florida State and Clemson have kind of dominated the ACC, at least for much of my lifetime. And how do you build a program if you're a bottom feeder in the ACC? Because money does equal success in a lot of this, in terms of your facility, in terms of recruiting resources. But at the same time, if I'm Clemson and I'm dominating the ACC and I'm bringing in the majority of our rev share in a TV deal, why in the world would I want to split that with a team that doesn't even get half the views that I'm getting? So I think it's fair. And I do think it poses a challenge for these smaller schools that don't have the program recognition. But, that's a problem they got to figure out. You got to play better football. And then guess what? Good football equals a lot of people watching you on TV. So if you're a small school, you got to figure it out and the money will come. But I don't think you should just be handed this money when Clemson and Florida State, quite frankly, have been dominating the conference in terms of viewership.
You know what? Here's another point. I've heard people's reaction to this where it'll be a case where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, guess what? This is the way of the world. It's the way college football had been for years and years. The fact now that you could pay the players at least gives you the opportunity to invest in the program and get better. I use as my exhibit A, SMU went from non-Big Four conference into the ACC. They ended up making the playoffs, Shaun. Why? Because they invested in their program. It was an avenue to get better. All right, Shaun, let's move on. Let's get back to baseball. How about it? We're in spring. Minds and thoughts turn to baseball. And it's interesting. You brought up to me the idea of a baseball salary cap, and it's something being talked about. Now, for full disclosure here, we've got to point out you're an LA guy. So I imagine you're a Dodger guy. My listeners know I'm a Mets guy. So if there's anyone who's taking advantage of spending more money to get a better team, it's your Dodgers and my Mets.
Well, Jim, I think the listeners from that can figure out that neither of us are going to sit here and say, "Hey, cut the salary cap. Let's make this fair." I have enjoyed the past couple of off seasons being a Los Angeles Dodger fan, so I'm not going to speak on my personal biases. I'm going to tackle this question from the player's perspective. Good luck getting players to agree on a collective bargaining agreement where they get capped on how much they can make. Because when you have that, let's look at the NBA model. Max contract in the NBA is 5 years. We see superstars get signed for 15 years in the MLB. So if they went this route where they're going to cap it, they're going to have to cap it at the number of years a contract can last as well. So we could sit here and say it makes it more fair, and I'm against it. Just baseball traditionally has not been a salary cap sport. It's really hard to go into that now. So talking from a player's perspective, it can't happen. The players, I don't know what it would take for them to agree to go under a salary cap where they're going to restrict how much they can make. And I think what the solution is for the small market teams listening is you need better ownership. That's point blank period. It doesn't matter that LA and New York are the biggest markets. When you have an owner who is willing to spend the money, you can be anywhere in the US or in Canada. We got Canadian teams with the Blue Jays. And if you have an owner that's willing to spend, you can build a super team in baseball. So if you're looking at the Angels, still a big market here, they have an owner that's not willing to spend money. So the solution for those teams is to get these owners out of the equation. If you're an MLB owner and you don't care about your team, which it appears that some of them really don't, they're competent having losing seasons year after year just to say they own a baseball team. There's plenty of billionaires out there who would buy a baseball team and put the money into it to build up a winning ball club year after year through free agency. So if you're a small market team, I think the only solution is get a better owner who's willing to spend the money, but this won't happen. Players will never let it happen, Jim.
I'm with you in that I don't think the players will just say, okay, fine, have a salary cap. And I believe it's after the 26th season that the current contract is up, and both sides are already prepping for a lockout or some kind of disruption of the game. And I think there are some solutions without going directly to a salary cap. One of the things they're already doing, or two of the things they're already doing, are first, they're penalizing teams who spend too much money. In fact, the owner of the Mets, his name is Steve Cohen. There's something known as the Cohen tax, which is if you spend beyond a certain point, and say it's $300 million per year on your team, any dollar you spend after that on salary, you pay $1 in tax. In other words, if you're at that point, and I believe the Dodgers are there also, if the Mets say right now sign a $20 million player, it would cost them $40 million. For every dollar they spent on the player, they have to pay a tax. And here's the second part to this, where that money goes is there's a pool of money that goes to the smaller market teams. So the Pirates, the A's, Tampa Bay, those teams get some money. The fact is, some of them pay in salary less than what they're making in that small market money that they're getting in a rev share type deal. So I think, Shaun, there are ways to make things better. And I'll actually go the other way. I think there should be a salary floor. You know what? If you're the Pirates, you can't just spend pennies, or if you're the Marlins, you, especially when you're being handed money by the other teams, you should have to pay a certain amount. That should help for the players because now you're forcing even the small market teams to pay a certain amount of money, a floor to it. The other part to it, if you're a small market team, you know what? Be smarter also. The Rays, the Guardians, they win games as small market teams because they have a great front office, Sean.
They do. They find ways to win. And I like how you put it as a salary floor because let's look at the Pittsburgh Pirates. You have Paul Skeens, a guy who I know it's only been his rookie year, but looks like he will be a generational pitcher. And they did absolutely nothing this offseason to add to their roster. So we're seeing in the early years, Paul Skeens' talent be wasted away in Pittsburgh because they have ownership that didn't want to go out and spend the money to improve their team. So it is like, let's give them a little kick, spend money, make your team better. And I think that's a pretty reasonable solution is tell these lower market teams who are, like you said, getting a lot of money in now from the tax, spend it and improve your roster. Don't just sit there complacent with losing seasons year after year. Now let's go from the MLB to the NFL. Myles Garrett, one of the best, if not the best, defensive player of the year in the NFL, has requested a trade out of Cleveland. The Browns are being a little stingy, but we know teams are making calls. One of those teams, the Philadelphia Eagles, looks like they get any star player they want. Are they going to make a trade for Myles Garrett? If so, is Myles Garrett comparable to Saquon Barkley offensively for them? So, Jim, tell me about the Eagles, and then tell me where else you think Myles Garrett could potentially end up if it's not your Philadelphia Eagles.
It's my Philadelphia Eagles. That's it. End of discussion. But, and you mentioned that it seems like the Eagles are able to trade for or sign anyone they want. And this goes a little bit back to our baseball discussion and having smart management. Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles, he has set the Eagles up to succeed. So he's placed himself where he'll get those extra draft picks. He puts himself in position. Then he makes the smart decisions. And he will also go against the grain a bit. Remember, the NFL over the last several years has really diminished the role of the running back. You don't spend money on the running backs. You don't do high draft picks for running backs. You just don't until you have Saquon Barkley. And Howie Roseman was the one guy who said, you know what, there's value there in getting the elite running back. The Giants, they had essentially a choice to keep the quarterback, Daniel Jones, or the running back, Saquon Barkley. I think they made the wrong decision, Sean. And but Howie Roseman was the one guy who recognized that and brought him in. So now you have a situation in Philadelphia where they're very talented and you have players wanting to play there. So Myles Garrett, would he be a comparable pickup on the defensive side to what Saquon was on the offensive side? Well, you know what? Howie Roseman has positioned himself to be able to make that move. And it will be costly with draft picks. But you know what? He's in a position, if he believes that's the case, he has the resources to pull the trigger on it. And you know what? I think Myles Garrett would love to be a Philadelphia Eagle. And right now, Sean, who wouldn't?
I completely agree. If there's one team, if I'm a player that I want to play for, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. It just seems like they're so well managed. And we saw during that Super Bowl run, it's a close knit team, too. These guys seem like they love being around each other, and the culture's been set there. And I think it's true. The Eagles, they have positioned themselves incredibly well to be able to give up the draft capital that's needed to go and get somebody like Myles Garrett. They've got a lot of free agents on defense that are inevitably going to be leaving. So what better way to replace some of those guys than getting perhaps the best edge rusher in all of football, and that would be Myles Garrett. Now, I want to throw out a couple other teams really quick for you. One fun landing spot. I do not think this is going to happen. I don't think this team would ever trade up. But could you imagine if we saw Myles Garrett go to the Cowboys and what him and Micah Parsons would do together on a defensive line? And especially being a Penn State fan, we know how good Micah Parsons is. And I feel bad for him right now because he gets triple teamed every single play because the Cowboys don't have anybody else there. That would just be something I'd love to see. And I think that would become the best pass rushing duo perhaps in NFL history.
The downside to it, the tough part is, are the Cowboys in the position to give up what it would take? They are not one player away from winning a Super Bowl. Could they afford to give away the draft capital necessary to bring in a Myles Garrett? And that's the situation the Eagles are in. They are good enough that they could make that kind of trade and get away with it. Just they could afford to spend the money on a Saquon Barkley because they have all the other things filled in, which also, far be it from me to defend the Giants and their decision, but they had a terrible offensive line. Saquon Barkley would not have been able to do the things for the Giants that he was able to do for the Eagles, which again is just part of already being a good team, a good franchise, just a good system. All right, let's stick with football, Shaun. And I asked you this when we chatted this week. We had the combine go on for the college football players, and the accepted two top quarterbacks have been Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders from your Colorado Buffaloes. They are the accepted top two quarterbacks. What's fun here, though, is who's QB3 in this draft? A lot of names, a lot of candidates for it, Shaun.
There are, and it's really interesting. I don't remember a year where there was perhaps this, I don't want to say drop off, but this big of a gap between QB2 and QB3. The past couple drafts, we've seen multiple quarterbacks go in the first round, and that certainly doesn't seem like it's going to be the case this year, unless maybe somebody has just an incredible pro day and continues to build momentum after the combine. The initial first name I had on my list was Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. He can sling it, and we saw him put up numbers, but as I dove deeper into his last season and this Ole Miss offense, it's a lot of one reads. He didn't have to analyze defenses. He was schemed open a lot, and to me, that's a little bit of a red flag going into the NFL when you have to be able to make full field reads. And I just don't know if he's been put in the position where he's had to do that. I'm not saying he can't, but it is a little concerning for me coming out of college, being a quarterback who, I'm thinking you might be able to lead a franchise. And the question mark is still, can you read a full field defense? Next on my list was Jalen Milroe from Alabama. I was very, very big on him coming into last season. And I hate to say it, but he disappointed as a passer last year. He's incredibly athletic. He makes the wow factor plays. He has a cannon of an arm, but we're still questioning, similar to how Justin Fields is still being questioned, can you make every throw? And when that's your concern as a quarterback, I get a little bit worried when, hey, can we hit a field side 10-yard out? If you can't make that throw in the NFL, you're going to struggle. So I think Jalen Milroe may have the biggest upside because if he can end up making every throw, he has the arm strength and the athleticism to be a dominant quarterback, similar to how Cam Newton was a couple of years in Carolina. The guy I'm landing on for this, though, is Tyler Shaw from Louisville. And the reason for this, and for context, Jim, he's been in college for 6 years. He has been around a lot, and listeners, a lot of that was due to injuries, so he got some medical redshirt years and everything. But my reasoning for him is he's a prototypical quarterback build. If you look at this draft class, it is a very short quarterback class in terms of height. There's not a lot of guys over 6'2", and we're getting away from that 6'5" prototypical Peyton Manning type of build in the NFL, but it still does mean something. And we've seen a lot of short quarterbacks struggle. We've seen a lot succeed. Kyler Murray, Bryce Young has started to look much better in Carolina, but it is still a negative factor. And a lot of those quarterbacks are listed 6 foot, 6'1", maybe 6'2" on a good day. Well, Tyler Shaw, 6'5", 225. He has the build, and he had a really good year at Louisville. So he impressed me at the Senior Bowl. That's my number 3 right now, Jim. And I think it's a little bit of a hot take there. I don't think a lot of people would have him at number 3, but I think he might have, the floor to be the third quarterback in this draft.
He did show well at the combine. So, and I don't think a lot of people were looking towards him. So I think you're right on that. Um, I had been a Jackson Dart fan since a year ago when his Ole Miss team looked so good against Penn State in the bowl game, and he seemed like he was very accurate. He just had uh, a skill level and a certain swagger about him that I thought would play well in the NFL. The interesting thing you mentioned about players being older, and in as far as quarterbacks go, I think for a while the NFL was saying we don't want that guy who's 24 or 25. We want the 21, 22-year old who we could shape him, mold him into what we need. However, in the last year or two, we've seen more of those experienced guys. Bo Nix, Michael Penix are the two names that I think of who not only were they older, but they also went through some struggles in college. Bo Nix at Auburn never developed into what people hoped that he would. He goes to Oregon, lo and behold, he becomes a first-round draft pick. Michael Penix ended up being drafted much higher than most people expected. Guess what? That seems to be a pretty good pick. So I'm going to be curious beyond the big two. If let me ask you this question, all right? If you had your choice between the big two or the rest of the field, 5 years from now, will the best quarterback from this class be from the top two or one of the other in the group?
I think it will be from the top two. And a lot of times that doesn't happen, but I think you look at Cam Ward and he has the wow factor. And then you look at Shador Sanders and he has the accuracy. I think one of those two is going to pan out to be a franchise quarterback. And I just don't have the confidence in the rest of the field to have a franchise quarterback in there. It's going to be really interesting where those guys land, who gets playing time relatively early. But I would say 5 years from now, I think that either one, if not both, of Cam Ward and Shador Sanders is going to be the franchise quarterback for whoever drafts them.
All right, Shaun, that's going to be the last word for this week's Shauns Take. Thank you for tuning in on the very first one. Hope you come back and join us again next week.
Keystone Sports Network.